Hey there, welcome to Spirits
And cousins.
with Tish,
And I'm Courtney.
and this is part 2 of the tools of the trade. Today we're going to be talking about more of the low tech but very effective tools that are used in paranormal investigations. And we've got Courtney, who is our expert in this area. Courtney's been doing investigations for over 20 years, and she has tried probably everything out there. And sometimes she will tell you that it comes back to using the basics, and they are the most effective. So we're going to jump in to low tech, but very effective ghost hunting and paranormal tools. And Courtney, let's talk about low tech. Which are the ones you prefer to use?
My number one right now is flashlights. My other preference is pendulums and dowsing rods. Those are fairly equal. The one that I tend to not use, plus I don't own one, is a Ouija
Yeah.
board.
What's the deal with the Ouija boards? They scare me.
They scare a lot of people, and I think people can still use them, but what they don't do is they don't set intentions first. And that's when anything can come out. You can open any portals, you can open that by doing any of this type of work. And so it is so important to set your intentions first about what you're seeking and the why. People use Ouija boards just for fun. And so they don't understand the piece of intentions. They're like, oh, I just want to do
I
this
just
and have
see
it
and hear
move.
about all these bad things, mostly because of movies, but they do. They scare me. I'm afraid of them. Um, and have you ever used one before?
Yes, I have. I used it many times when I was a child because a child of the 80s, Ouija boards were pretty popular. And I have had it work for me. And I remember feeling in awe and also scared. And and again, people are fearful of Ouija boards because they don't set those intentions, and so anything can come through.
Got it.
I personally don't have experience with like these big, major, horrible things coming through Ouija boards. Um, it's not to say that they don't work. It's again, just be careful with how you're using it and how you set your intentions around it.
So sometimes when you go into an investigation and you have all your tools, do you ever just start out with the basics of things like dowsing rods, pendulums, or flashlights, or do you jump into the higher tech stuff first?
I typically jump into the higher tech stuff, such as the spirit boxes, but then I move into the lower tech, especially if within the first half hour, if we're not getting much from those spirit boxes, then I'm switching over, or I might use them in conjunction with the flashlights, just because of how well the flashlights have been working lately. So like when we were checking out Fort Ord this last weekend, I brought up the spirit boxes and the flashlights. Well, then they started responding to the flashlights. So we left the spirit boxes out for a little bit, but then eventually just used the flashlights because that's how we were getting the most responding.
One of the things that I've observed when you're doing your thing is I tend to notice that if you are in a building or sitting at a table with people or, doing a private investigation inside someone's house, I notice that a lot of times you'll start with the basics, like you'll start with the lower tech, whether that be flashlights, dowsing rods, or even pendulums. I've noticed this. I also notice, and for better or for worse, is just things I've noticed when I've tracked along with you, is if we go to a destination or we go to something that's outside of someone's house, you tend to haul out all the technology. But I notice that when you're in a house or you're at someone's, home, or you're doing something that is more informal, you use the lower tech approaches. Have you thought about that, or is it just the way it works, or do you do that on purpose?
Um, I don't always do it on purpose. I pull out what I feel most comfortable with, and I also pull out what I feel intuitively might be best for the
Yep.
situation at first.
Great. Okay, so we're going to go through dowsing rods, pendulums, and flashlights. And why don't you go ahead? Courtney's going to kind of go through these. Let's start with dowsing rods. Probably one of the oldest,
So
one of the oldest tools, right?
absolutely one of the oldest tools. I mean, dowsing rods started way back when to find water. And people would walk around properties just doing their dowsing rods, having their dowsing rods point them the way to this hidden water. I even was reading when California was in one of the biggest droughts they've ever had. That's what they do. They pulled out their dowsing rods to find the hidden water out here in California to work through the drought. And so it definitely is one of the oldest tools to use. It is controversial because you're holding them in your hands. So typically they're made out of copper and they have a handle on them which can allow them to freely move left and right or spin around. But of course, the hard part is we are humans. We are not perfect. We might shake. We might breathe heavily. And things like that can move the rods also. So that's where some of the controversy where some of the controversy happens with dowsing rods is because you can actually move them.
When did they start? When did they start getting used for paranormal investigations? Do you know?
That is a great question, and I have no idea. That was that and the EMF meter were the first two things that I started using when I was doing investigations back in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s.
Are dowsing rods good for beginners to use?
I think so. It is more of being aware of how we move our own body when you use them. What I like to do is I have my elbows up on a table and then I hold them loosely in my hands. By having my elbows on a table, it makes them more steady. Where if I were to hold my elbows on my body, then the dowsing rods might catch on to my breathing.
That makes sense. Let's talk about pendulums.
Pendulums are one of my favorite tools, and again, it was another one of my first tools. So you can see the theme in this is when I first started doing paranormal investigations, we didn't have all the fancy tools. And if there were fancy tools, they were pretty expensive. Like I remember everyone talking about the Spirit Box 7 and how amazing it was, but it was pretty expensive in that moment. What I like about dowsing rods, about pendulums, I will use them especially when I want to have short conversations and I don't need a lot of information. So yes, no questions, maybe. That's when I will use that. If I want more information, I'm more going to use the spirit box and see how much that can help out. But pendulums work with your own energy or the energy that's around you. They're easier for spirit. It doesn't take a lot of energy to use that. Same with the dowsing rods. It takes less energy to use the dowsing rods and the pendulums than it does the spirit box, where they have to figure out how to get these words out. And you can just use whatever pendulum feels good to you. I often wear my crystal necklaces, so I can take it off and use that as a pendulum.
So can about anything be a pendulum? You don't have to buy a pendulum. You could make one out of something too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You could just put one on I even have this little rod out here. Whoops. You could just attach one with a fishing line to a rod. Make it pretty easily.
Yeah. Last year when I was in Michigan and my sisters wanted to kind of have some fun, I took a fishing weight and tied it on to the end of some fishing line and it worked just fine.
Oh, that was smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So pendulums are a very easy entry level way that depending on what you have around the house, you don't even have to buy anything.
You don't. And again, with all of these things, being careful and setting your intentions for what you want to come into your space is so important.
And sometimes you've had to clear houses and clear rooms and help people clear their mind in some cases because they've messed around and played with pendulums without setting intentions.
Yes. Yes, I have. It's always an interesting thing talking to those spirits and seeing what's been going on. More often than not, they're called there unknowingly.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a friend who did that unknowingly and then started having nightmares and all kinds of other stuff. And I had to have Courtney step in and help. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Next we have flashlights. And I never would have thought about a flashlight. But Courtney, can you kind of explain flashlights? What type of flashlights, how you set them up, how they're used? Because I think they're a lot more straightforward. I thought there was something special about like the flashlights you had. I didn't know any better. But maybe you could walk us through flashlights. You know, what kind do you get? How are they used? How do you set them up, and how they've worked for you?
So I love flashlights. And it is another one of the things that I learned how to use when I first started doing paranormal investigations. But I have to admit, I didn't get my own until recently. And because I'd done them in the past and I hadn't had great responses, so I just didn't add it to my collection of investigation tools. But what we found lately, especially since November, when I brought them to Oregon, is they've been working amazingly well. And they are, the only thing special about them is they are Maglite. And the brand doesn't matter, but what matters is that you turn it on and off through the flashlight lens. So it just twists. And what you do is you put it on the spot right before you turn it on. And so that way it's easy for the spirit to turn on, but it's really hard for a person. You can't just turn it on through thinking, turn on. It is very easy for spirits to use because they can just use their energy to slightly turn the flashlight on, which then emits the flashlight, or ask them to turn it off, which then of course reduces the light or turns it off. But it's not easy to turn, it's not easy to turn on. I can tap my hands and it won't turn on.
Yeah, no, I've seen you test it and show me. I'm amazed. I don't know if things go in and out of style with how spirits want to talk to us, but I agree with you that at least in the situations that I've tagged along with you on, the flashlights are really, they respond so quickly. And that's a lot of what you've been putting up. For all of you listening, you need to follow us on Instagram, Spirits and Cousins, because Courtney, that is where you're going to see really exclusive content that you won't see anywhere. And what you're going to see is you're going to see some of these investigations and you're going to watch for yourselves what happens when she uses things like a flashlight and asks questions of the spirits that are there with us. It's amazing. Again, follow us on Instagram and you'll see these videos that she uploads because they are just amazing.
Yeah, it's so fun. And we went out to Fort Ord this last weekend and brought out the spirit boxes or spirit box and brought out the flashlights. And spirit tends to respond better to flashlights when I bring those two different things out. At least the ones have been around lately.
Right, right. So we've talked a lot about, in the first part, we talked about all the different high-tech gadgets. And in this one, we've talked about more of the traditional low tech. And I'm curious, I have a question for you. And my question is, and maybe some of the listeners have thought about this, but my question for you is, do you think that depending on the spirits you're trying to contact and how long they've been away from from the living or earth. Do you think that they respond better to things that are simpler, or do you not think it matters what tools you're using? So an example would be if you're in, I'm just making this up, if you went to do an investigation in an old Victorian and you're trying to, talk to some spirits that were there 150 years ago, do you think you're going to get them to talk through the spirit boxes, the voice recorders, um, or using EMF, or are they more likely to respond more to dowsing rods, pendulums? I'm always curious about this because I always say to you, how smart can these spirits be? Because, some of them passed 100+ years ago. This stuff wasn't around. What are your thoughts on that? Like, yeah, that's my question. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't see a pattern. And I mean, by trade, I look for patterns. I'm a problem solver. I don't see a big pattern. And that's why I start off with some tools that I think the flashlights are easy. The spirit boxes can be easy, but aren't always. And so that's why I tend to have a variety of things or a variety of devices, because I don't know what they're going to respond to. And some might respond so well to the flashlights and then really struggle to use a spirit box, and vice versa. So I think it is important to have a variety of tools. You don't need 20 different tools, but you can do 2, 3, 4 tools and have it work for you.
So it'll be interesting because I know that in some of the upcoming episodes, not only do you want to start interviewing other people, but there's going to be some investigations that you want to talk about, and that you've been on or that we've done together. And I think one of the things that would be good would be to share what tools are we using when we did them. So when we talk about them, like you start off by giving the intro to where we went, what we did, what we were trying to, who we were trying to talk to, and then what tools did we use? Because I can tell you, as interested as I am in this, I'm still new. You've been doing it for a long time. And one of the things I always wonder is, what tools do you use? What tech should you be using to talk to the spirits and the different energies coming through? And as a beginner, I always don't know where to start. So I think going through all these different gadgets and tools that are used helped me understand everything out there. And it also allowed me to realize that you don't have to go high tech to have fun with this
Mm-mm.
and to do some, general just investigating.
You really don't. I think the things that you need are just 2 to 4 or 5 tools, some type of thing you can use to video, and an open mind and intentions.
In all your investigations, what do you get the most? What do you get the most response from? What tool do you get the most response from when you're doing an investigation? If you were to like rank them overall over all the years you've been doing it, I'm just curious to know.
Oh, well, the one tool we have not talked about, and it is not evidence based, so it's a difficult one, is the claircognizance, meaning having a clear knowing. I, as a medium, receive information and I don't always know where it comes from or what's happening, but that for me, that's one of the ways I get the most information. But it's really difficult to have evidence with that. How do I know something is talking to me? And I've had so many different conversations by using my claircognizance ability. And so that's my number one, but it doesn't always turn on for me, or it doesn't always give me this clear knowing. And so then I use the tools. So if I were to rank the tools in an order of how I use them, I would say throughout my entire history, that's a hard one because it's ebbed and flowed so much.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think it's the spirit box, and other times it's the old fashioned stuff. I would probably say dowsing rods, flashlight, spirit boxes, EMF. If you were
Yep.
to ask me this question 10 years ago, I would have said EMF would have been number one or around there.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, look, I think we've talked about, everything you can possibly use out there. They don't all cost an arm and a leg. You can get into this and start doing your own investigating. I know it's most important, though, to set intentions, right?
You'll hear me clearly say that many, many times because it is the most important thing you do if you're going to go out and seek spirits.
So we hope you've enjoyed learning more about the tools of the trade. I hope that, actually, Courtney, I hope you feel better. Because some of
Thanks.
you may have noticed she's been sniffing in the background here. She's got something going on, and
Sorry.
that's it's part of life. Hope you feel better though, and we've got some exciting episodes coming up. So until next time, thank you for listening to Spirits and Cousins. I'm Tish,
And I'm Courtney.
and don't forget, you can get in touch with us on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're across most of the podcast platforms, and we're Spirits and Cousins.